that's real anxiety. And
Right.
the Stanford study that I mentioned earlier showed that of successful AI implementations, where you're not just doing a layoff and AI washing it and saying it's about AI, or you're really doing a project, less than half
Mm.
of those resulted in headcount reductions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 6 of CultureClub X, powered by CultureMonkey. I'm your host, Darcy Mehta. CultureMonkey is an AI-powered employee engagement platform that helps organizations listen to their employees and strengthen workplace culture. CultureClub X is our global thought leadership forum where CHROs and people leaders share insights, discuss trends, and exchange practical strategies for building future-ready organizations. Today, we're so pleased to welcome Alexis Fink, founder of Propeller Insight. Alexis, welcome. It's so great to have you here with us.
Thank you. I am really delighted and looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise, yes. And to give a little bit of your background, Alexis Fink is a technology executive with over 20 years of experience across Microsoft, Intel, and Meta, where she most recently led people analytics and workforce strategy. She now advises organizations on transformation, AI strategy, and organization design with a focus on aligning technology, data, and talent to drive business outcomes. She is also actively involved in research and thought leadership in people analytics and organizational effectiveness, and has authored Investing in People and Employee Sensing and Surveys. So, Alexis, your experience working at the intersection of AI, workforce strategy, and people analytics makes your perspective especially relevant for today's discussion. And we're so looking forward to exploring the topic, the future of work with AI, role transformation, risk, and employee experience. Before we begin, could you just briefly share your own leadership journey with us?
Sure. You did a great job in the intro. There are a couple of other things on either shoulder to mention. In the last year or so of my post-corporate season, I have been playing with AI as a key source of transformation. But ironically, before I moved into the tech industry, I was also playing with AI and some of the underpinnings of AI, matrix algebra and optimization models and these kinds of things in the manufacturing setting, and also through my graduate research, where I was building those kinds of models to really work on performance and safety, particularly in aviation and piloting sorts of contexts. So this has really been a key theme of my entire career, and I'm really just so excited to see it being more accessible and being able to move into more kinds of contexts now.
Amazing. And I really like how you said play. Like you just enjoy playing with it and learning about it. Shows you're obviously passionate about it. So you're working in the right realm for sure. So no, thank you for sharing that. So let's just dive into our first question. So what is the most significant misconception organizations hold about how AI will transform roles? And what does research indicate compared to what leaders often assume?
Oh, that's such a great question, because so much of the conversation is about the technology. Which tool should I use? Is this model better than that one? How is this slightly better, slightly different than another? What contract should I pursue? And all of that is interesting and important. But most of the data, including a recent really excellent study out of Stanford, showed that really the technology doesn't matter that much. In fact, any of the frontier models can do most of what you need. Maybe less so on the coding side, but most of your general applications. And that the barriers, the places, the failures are generally not the technology themselves. Their integration, they're updating business processes, they're reimagining how jobs might work, their change management where people feel distressed, they are a lack of active executive sponsorship that removes blockers. They are all of those things that we know matter when you're fundamentally changing how work happens. And so the technology, of course, is important, but it is a yes and kind of situation. But you need to get the technology right. But you need to do more in terms of tackling the right problem. You need to do more in terms of rethinking some of the habits we've had for a century of organizational management to fit into a new set of capabilities.
Absolutely. You said yes, and that my mind immediately went to improv, because that's what they teach you in improv class. And obviously things are moving so quickly that we need to be agile. So a lot of that, same concept applies. And what you said about the technology is so interesting. Technology is there, it's doing great things, but it's how are we using it? How are we learning to implement it in all the different areas? So.
Well, it's interesting. Robotic process automation has been around for years and years and years and wasn't used very widely, not because it wasn't possible, but because all the stuff around it was hard. Now, RPA has much more rigid requirements around the data that are used to feed it. So it is a more difficult implementation. But we've had technology that could scalably execute tasks for a long time. And the utilization rate suggests some things about management, leadership, reconfiguring jobs, all of those transformation elements that are lessons we really need to consider deeply.
That's why these interviews and podcasts are so important, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. So how do you distinguish between roles that are truly being transformed by AI versus those that are only being disrupted? And why is this distinction important for workforce strategy in 2026?
What a great question. And the way I will reframe that is which roles are being augmented and which roles are being replaced. And thinking through what kinds of work were never possible before, where you might be in more of an augmentation situation, versus the kinds of work that tended to be very AI replacement friendly. Things that were very repetitive, generally a little bit lower risk, things that were quite well described, and that you can ask a machine to do. And so one of the first places in organizations that many AI projects begin is somewhere in the recruiting space. And while a lot of attention goes to the candidate part of that, one of the early trends we saw were schedulers. And boy, you don't really need a person to walk through and try and thread that needle of making schedules map up. That is a great use case for technology to look at all the relevant calendars and find something and manage all of that, as well as automation of updates, right? That is a great automation use case. And so there are people in large organizations whose whole job was scheduling things. And that is a job that really is replaceable. Now, the question is, what were the skill sets of the people doing that scheduling? Was it negotiation and diligence? Was it expertise? Was that the first rung on a career ladder that now they can move up to? Or are those generally and genuinely jobs that would be fully displaced and put somewhere else? On the flip side, there are all kinds of roles where things that were never possible before are suddenly possible. Or things are possible at a much higher level of quality, which doesn't mean that you need fewer people, because it's not a volume play, it's a quality play, or it's an innovation play. And those kinds of jobs, those kinds of roles, those kinds of strategic opportunities tend to pull in excellent talent as opposed to replacing. And so here I think about, in my old team, we had an awful lot of people, which was marvelous, an awful lot of PhDs, and they still spent a bunch of their time data cleaning. They spent a bunch of their time fighting with code and making it do what they wanted. And we also had about 3 times the number of requests coming into our team than we could actually fulfill because we were gated by capacity. And so now that team doesn't have to spend that amount of time cleaning data, building dashboards. They don't have to spend that much time fighting with their code or trying to figure out what somebody else had coded up when jobs change. Now they can focus much more on solving a higher volume of questions, solving with more precision, engaging more closely with clients so the solutions they come up with are a closer match to the strategic requirement. So all of those kinds of things suggest an elevation. I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that there will absolutely be fewer heads involved in some work in some organizations. But if you look at the history of industrial revolutions, while the Industrial Revolution most people think of when work moved from farm to factory, those jobs didn't really go back to the farms, but they spawned an enormous new set of jobs that we had never thought of. They spawned machinists and engineers and marketers and all of these other things that were never really feasible or required in the prior industrial framework. And so my expectation is we'll start to see some of that as well.
That's so true. You also had me thinking with your example about the scheduler, where you and obviously it used to go from pencil and paper and someone, actually doing that. Of course, then the computer came along and maybe they thought they'd lose their job. But it's even that idea that, yes, there will be certain jobs that are replaced, but maybe there's that next rung on the ladder that person can move towards and, or just completely new and different, exciting things. So very, very interesting.
It's been about 10 years that we've been saying, golly, it'll be the end of radiology, right? Because one of the very early cases of AI and visual compute in particular was that AI could really help in diagnostic imaging, right? And it was really good at identifying cancers that were missed, which is true and great and incredibly powerful. But just like the MRI didn't get rid of physicians and in fact created more of them, we haven't seen radiologists disappear. And in fact, I read a study recently over the last couple of weeks that AI, unfortunately, is also very happy to describe images that were never uploaded. That sort of the probabilistic engine creates new problems. And even if the diagnosis can be done, some of the conversation about meaning and what are you going to do with these results still remains. So like new innovations for millennia, we don't necessarily see a reduction in aggregate jobs. We see a shift in what's demanded. And an awful lot of that shift is away from things that are not that much fun to do. Very repetitive, very boring, difficult vigilance tasks. I remember manually fixing large databases, and I'm really happy not to have to do that anymore.
Yes, data entry, things like that, right? Where you just realize
I put a lot of 10 key in my life.
It took.
Oh my gosh. And terrible work. Yeah.
That's and the example with radiologists is so true. And of course, we want to get a second opinion anyway. And, you know, with doctors, you often do. But now maybe it's that your first or second may be AI, but you're going to also want to have someone else check it. So
that's right.
Very, very interesting. So what did organizations underestimate about the human transition when AI entered the workplace? And what have you observed firsthand that leaders often overlook?
You know, I think leaders are in such a bubble so often where they're excited. And they're excited about the efficiency. They're excited about the innovation. They're maybe anxious about falling behind, so wanting to push really far forward. And organizations often have a sort of clay layer through which information can't travel, either up or down. And I do think a lot of organizations underestimate the amount of anxiety that their employees have. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my partner, my family member? What does this mean for my kid? What does this mean for my skills? Am I still going to be relevant? If I was in a job that paid me very well, we're seeing this already with some of the trends coming out of this last several years of layoffs. People are being reemployed, but in many cases, they're being reemployed at substantially lower wages, substantially lower salary. And so what does this mean about my ability to afford the life that I've committed to, afford my mortgage, send my kids to college, all these kinds of things? That's real anxiety. And the Stanford study that I mentioned earlier showed that successful AI implementations, where you're not just doing a layoff and AI washing it and saying it's about AI, or you're really doing a project, less than half of those resulted in headcount reductions. So the bulk of them, more than half of them, are resulting in sort of upside potential as opposed to headcount reductions. But humans as a species are keyed to overestimate loss. We saw this in the Tversky and Kahneman work. If you picked up the book Thinking Fast and Slow, they won a Nobel Prize for this, that people really, really, really overestimate loss. They over-index on it, and they're really anxious about it. So you have to communicate and over engage when there is a risk of loss, because people will, again, overestimate, over prioritize that loss. So what are those things that you can do to engage with the folks actually doing the work? How do you make sure you know what they're really doing, which frankly most executives don't really, they remember how they did it 20 years ago. That's not how it's happening now, right? And make sure that you are actually close enough to the work, or you're engaging people who are close enough to the work, that you can make thoughtful decisions about how to redesign work, how to redesign jobs, how to redesign reporting relationships, how to think about skills in ways that allow that upside potential, that competitive growth, as opposed to ways that are just, how many people can I get rid of?
Absolutely. I mean, it comes down to communication, which seems so simple, right? But it always bears repeating. And like you said, leaders do often live in a bubble, and they're also learning AI and learning how to navigate everything that's going on. So sharing that, finding out their employees' anxieties is so key. So this leads to the next question. How should organizations use people analytics and real-time employee sensing to measure the human impact of AI adoption? And what does a mature listening approach look like today?
Oh my gosh, how much time do we have? I have in the past been able to very successfully use passive listening of public-ish reactions. So, for example, as things are being announced, many organizations have something like a Slack or some kind of a real-time tool, CultureClub or another that is, or rather CultureMonkey or another that has some real-time capabilities. And you can often turn those on, not only when an event is happening, so you can see real-time how people are reacting, but also I have in the past been able to use it even during a talk or an announcement to see what parts resonate well, where you'll get either positive reactions or positive comments on a minute-by-minute analysis, or which parts are creating anxiety or creating challenge or creating frustration. And so the ability to look at those things can be really valuable. Also, the ability to parse out either different segments based on their role, etc., or different segments based on a rollout schedule, which is a really lovely form of genuine experimentation. You have a real control group when one group goes live and the other group hasn't. They have the same economic context and other things, and one has had the intervention and the other hasn't had that rollout yet. And so it gives you an opportunity to really find what things are working well and make sure that that listening is not just on the sort of objective measures of, widgets through the process, but also on those things where people are expressing frustration, confusion, anxiety versus excitement, engagement, creativity, or whatever else you might want, right? And we're seeing more and more the ability to use qualitative analysis. And while it's not perfect, and I struggle with some of the boundaries of imperfection as well, it is directionally useful. And so if you have tens of thousands of pieces of qualitative information that you need to kind of make sense out of, you don't necessarily need absolute perfection in those to get something that's directionally useful. And the ability to use, whether it's an LLM or a more traditional natural language processing type of technique, the ability to really make sense out of where people are experiencing those positive versus negative emotions and what factors are leading to that kind of an example. Retail establishments are great for this because you have natural case studies, right? What are the behaviors of this store level manager? And we did this rollout, and how did it go versus this store level manager and this rollout, or these community attributes, right? Where you can really start to understand causal mechanisms and then take that learning and apply it to the next tranche of implementations.
So true. It's easy in retail, like you said, and that passive listening during real-time events is so valuable because you're getting those emotions, those feelings, those thoughts while something's going on, even before someone's had a chance to ruminate on it more. So valuable. So, how should CHROs rethink the HR function, its structure, skills, and mandate to remain effective as AI reshapes work?
Oh my gosh. So I will own that I am a people analytics person. So of course I think data should be the key tent pillar that holds the whole thing up, right? Even if you're looking at something that traditionally in some organizations has less data to it, something learning and development, executive succession, those kind of organization development, which traditionally have a lot of expertise as opposed to sort of dispassionate data. I think there's more and more evidence that those can really matter. I do think that one of the things HR needs to get really good at is tighter partnerships, if not outright alignment or joining with not just IT, which is a trend we've seen for the last year, but also with finance, because they're the folks who measure stuff and care about outcomes, and engineering or manufacturing, depending on what the nature of your organization might be. In other words, we need not just the agent or IT smartness happening here. We also really need some of the financial structures and thinking through how are we going to make sense out of all of this so that we can make the best possible choices that take the best possible advantage of technology that's available to us while using the very best of what people in the system will bring forward. And I do believe that HR has this really incredible opportunity above us or in front of us at this moment, because HR is really the specialty organization about work as well as about workers. So we are the ones who have a great idea about what people are capable of and how those skills and capabilities connect to other skills and capabilities so that we can up-level those. Sometimes that means changing functions entirely, but it does let us drive to higher performance and drive to higher levels of work. Additionally, we are the folks who've been doing org design. We are the folks who've been doing job design. We are the folks who've been pricing jobs against the market. We are the folks who've been at least building the architecture for performance management. We are the ones who build the rails on which the entire organization runs. And so the more HR embraces its partner organizations and embraces that role on reinventing how work happens and all of the rules that we grew up and cut our teeth on that may or may not fit us well, the more we can embrace that, the more opportunity organizations have to really leapfrog in what their capabilities and their competitive advantage might be. It's an exciting time.
Absolutely. HR is the most important, right? So what you said about tighter partnerships works both ways. So, obviously for HR, understanding more, but it's the other, like you said, if it's the finance department, if it's engineering, they're also going to be able to learn from HR and take it. Right. So it's going to work both ways. So yeah, it is an exciting time. So this might be hard to answer, but what is one, so everybody can pick one non-negotiable action people leaders must take in 2026 to build AI capability while maintaining trust and employee experience?
I only get to choose one thing they have to do to build capability while maintaining experience. And as much as it may sound like pandering, I think they really need a robust and transparent mechanism for connecting with their people. Some kind of, I'm hesitant to use the word listening because it needs to be two-way, but some way to really make sure that their finger's on the pulse of what's going on inside their organization.
I agree.
Well, that was easy.
That's a good answer.
All right, then.
It's hard to pick one, right? There's so many things. So, So how can platforms like CultureMonkey support leaders in tracking real-time sentiment and managing engagements as AI changes how work is done?
So it is really, really important to make sure that the data are not just going into a black hole. The sensing is important, but more than sensing is reflecting it back to the organization and saying, you said this and I heard you, and here's what I'm going to do about it. And sometimes what I'm going to do about it is nothing, but you need to own that. And if you are genuinely unable to address something, you might want to consider not asking it. Because anytime you ask something, you're creating an expectation that it will be addressed. And if you don't meet that expectation, you can actually manufacture greater discontent. So the main thing you can do is make sure you are actually thoughtfully designing, analyzing, and responding to that feedback, that information that your population is offering to you. We find people talk about survey fatigue and people don't want to respond. I got a lot of friends in the survey community who will talk about the fact that's actually just inaction fatigue. If I've told you 5 times that this is broken and you've never done anything about it, I'm going to stop telling you, right? So the main thing you can do is design really excellent, relevant questions you're willing to do something about, and then embed that in a regular rhythm. Are you looking at these every month? Are you looking every time something spikes? Are you looking at it every week and addressing anything that's out of the ordinary, either high or low? And how do you make sure that those solutions, those places that you address something, aren't kind of behind the scenes where no one knows about them? How do you directly tie those changes to the feedback we received? You said X and we did Y to address it. Or 3 months ago, you said X, we did Y, and now X has improved. And thank you for being willing to share that with us so we could do something about it, so we can move forward, right? Really making sure that you're closing that loop.
Alexis, we've asked this question before, and we've talked about with others, of course, what's the point of a survey if you're not acting on it and the feedback. Right. But you expanded on this so well and gave me so many other things to think about. So definitely the best answer, because I, like you said, obviously making it regular, it's so important. And thoughtfully designing the questions if you're not prepared to address those, if you're not prepared to make changes and to have that feedback, then it could work in the opposite direction and provide discontent if you're not addressing them. So thinking about what questions you're asking to start with. So being more thoughtful in that regard makes so much sense.
And it can be really useful. In my past roles, I've tried to connect the employee survey to exit results, exit behavior, onboarding survey results, and also candidate behavior. And so you tend to get signals that show up at different time horizons, and you can get some really helpful information about particular segments, about particular problems in your employee value proposition or the way you're engaging with folks that can help you tie together a coherent and compelling story by adding in some of these extra signals that, again, you're reviewing on a regular basis and actively and openly responding to.
So true. Well, Alexis, I could talk to you all day. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Is there anything else you'd like to share or topic to discuss that we didn't get to today?
This was great fun. I really appreciate it. I don't think I'd pick one thing we didn't get to. There's so many things to address in this moment. And I think I would just leave with the idea that over and over again, when I work with large groups, everybody thinks everybody else is farther along on an AI journey. And the number of folks who say, hey, we're just really still experimenting, or we're having a hard time getting off the starting blocks, our experiments aren't paying off. If you feel like you're behind, you probably actually aren't. So taking a moment to stop, be planful, get out of panic mode, and really be thoughtful might be your best way forward.
That's great advice, because I think that's a lot of organizations feel that way, and people and employees, because it is moving so fast, so quickly. It's changing and it's coming at us so much. And so I think we're all always feeling that we're behind. So that's great advice to know that, well, in reality, if I'm feeling that way, so is this guy, and so is this girl. So it's we're not as behind as we think we are, because everyone is experimenting and there's a lot to cover and a lot of changes happening. So that is
one of my friends,
great advice.
One of my friends, a Harvard economist, pointed out that it took us 40 years to really figure out how to use electricity, right? It just takes a while.
40 years. Wow. We're doing good now, I think.
I think we'll shorten that time horizon by a little bit, but the point is it's not overnight.
Right. That's so fascinating. Well, your perspective highlights the importance of balancing technological advancement with a clear focus on the human experience. And as organizations continue to adopt AI, it becomes essential to understand not just how work is changing, but how people experience that change. And this is where CultureMonkey adds value through real-time listening and pulse surveys that help leaders understand employee sentiment and take timely, informed action. Before we conclude, Alexis, how can our listeners connect with you and continue the conversation?
Thank you very much. I am easiest to find on LinkedIn. There are not that many Alexis Finks. I'm the one who does surveys. And I would be delighted to talk with folks in your audience.
Okay, I'm sure many will connect with you, as will I. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe. And that's a wrap for this episode of CultureClub X, powered by CultureMonkey. Until next time, I'm your host, Darcy, signing off.